Most people are familiar with the animation Renaissance, a stretch of time spanning roughly from the late 1980s through the early 2000s. This period is associated with high-quality, creator-driven films and television that had a massive success and influence on especially Western animation. The Disney Renaissance, the creation of Nickelodeon, animated sitcoms like The Simpsons. There were numerous reasons for this shift, with various people, companies, technological advancements, and productions that all helped usher in this era, but among these names is one that, while by no means obscure, is often overlooked, despite being one of the most important shows to not only this period of animation, but the medium as a whole. One that promised high adventure that's beyond compare, Disney's Adventures of the Gummi Bears. Not only was it influential in its time, but despite being from the 1980s, it had numerous characteristics we often associate with more recent shows. Those less familiar with this property may wonder how a show that looks like little more than Care Bears ripoffs advertising candy could be so influential and ahead of its time. To unravel that mystery, we have to look at the history of animated television. The earliest television programs were, generally speaking, news reports, live events, vaudeville acts, game shows, and broadcasts of old films, with 1949's The Lone Ranger being one of the earliest examples of what we colloquially think of as a TV series. The first animated television series was Crusader Rabbit, which began airing in 1950. It was pretty much a parody of radio serials of the time, filled with wordplay and cultural references, although its earliest episodes were barely animated at all. More famous animated shows that followed included the likes of The Huckleberry Hound Show and Rocky and Bullwinkle, the latter actually being helmed by the same people behind Crusader Rabbit, which explains their similarities. The earliest shows tended to use what is called limited animation. This was largely a result of studios seeing what was originally a countercultural stylistic movement and bastardizing the movement to make animation for as little money as possible. Minimal movement, reused animation, repetitive character designs that were simple to animate, dialogue-driven writing for the purpose of minimizing animation costs, and so on. There were some stylistic developments in this time, but they all tended to have in common that they were made using techniques that cost as little money as possible. Why was this? Well, naturally, animation is expensive and time-consuming, and so there was little potential for return on investment. You see, for years it was pretty much illegal in the United States to make shows that advertised to children, and even back then animation was often seen as for kids, so why spend the money on a show whose demographic was almost impossible to turn a profit from? There were some properties that attempted to skirt these rules, such as Hot Wheels from 1967, but they tended to receive backlash and sometimes legal repercussions. In the 1980s, court rulings started easing up on these restrictions. This allowed studios to produce animated shows that served first and foremost as commercials. On the plus side, because there was now a tangible return on investment, studios could put more money into these productions, resulting in higher production values. However, this practice gave animated television a worse reputation, with the prevailing sentiment being that artistry was being sacrificed for marketability. But that would soon change, as the Walt Disney Company saw an opportunity. The problem most animated television shows faced was that they were made by smaller companies that had to rely on merchandise sales to keep afloat. But Disney, a massive corporation worth millions of dollars, could afford to make animated shows without relying on merchandise, with their logic being that the quality of their work would be intrinsically valuable as well as provide profits through indirect means such as syndication. So, in 1984, a new branch of the company was created, Disney Television Animation. By the following year, they debuted their first two shows on September 14th, 1985. First was The Wuzzles, a show created by Fred Wolf that was higher quality than a lot of what was coming out, but still followed the traditional formula of its contemporaries, an animated show marketed at children to sell toys. The second was a show that followed this new, creator and quality-driven approach to animated television. Amusingly, despite the show's namesake being a brand of candy, there was almost no commercial tie-in, with the show receiving relatively little merchandise and very few cross-promotions. Instead, it was a show that aimed to prove that animated television could be a worthwhile endeavor based on its own merits as a high-quality production. Did the experiment work? Well, considering that The Wuzzles entered production that same year, while Gummi Bears would end up becoming one of Disney's longest-running shows even to this day, I'd say the experiment was a success. Adventures of the Gummi Bears primarily takes place in the fantasy kingdom of Dunwin. It follows a secretive band of bears in their home, Gummy Glen. Why are they in hiding? They are the last few members of a once thriving and advanced society that was driven away by humans, with most of these bears, called the Great Gummies, fleeing to other lands and it being widely believed that they went extinct, if they ever existed at all. Those who stayed behind were tasked with upkeeping Gummy Glen if and when their ancestors return. Gradually over time, these bears died out until only 6 remained in Gummy Glen, living a relatively simple life and having long since lost much of their ancestors' knowledge and culture. But everything changes when they are discovered by a human boy named Kevin, who possesses a Gummy Medallion, an ancient artifact that can unlock the Great Book of Gummy, which holds the secrets of the Gummi Bears' history, technology, and magic. However, the bears are also discovered by Duke Igthorn, a megalomaniac who wishes to use their knowledge and powers to overthrow Dunwin. Episodes tend to focus on conflicts with Duke Igthorn and other antagonists, rediscovering lost magic and technology, trying to get in contact with the Great Gummies, slice-of-life stories, among other premises. Being produced by Disney, the animation is high quality for television of the time. The cast is made up largely of names who either were already or would soon become big names in voice acting, even if their performances aren't always the most consistent. There's some decent humor here and there, and the writing, while not great and dated in some respects, is much more compelling than most of the show's contemporaries, with continuity beyond multi-parters and occasional dips into surprisingly dark subject matter. Add to it all a catchy, memorable theme song, and, especially when comparing this to the competition, it's not all that surprising that Gummi Bears was a hit. Following this success, Disney would be inspired to make more shows that focused on quality above merchandising, such as The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh and DuckTales, with the eventual creation of the Disney Afternoon television block to showcase series like these, making this series one impetus for the Disney Renaissance. It also proved to the rest of the Western industry that animated television could be high quality and a worthwhile investment without relying on being overly commercial, which made endeavors like Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network be seen as more feasible, and those networks helped the industry evolve further. In short, Adventures of the Gummi Bears was not only one reason that the Disney Renaissance happened, but it was a pioneer that paved the way for the overall animation renaissance of the 90s, making it one of the most important shows to the medium. However, this show wasn't just influential, it was also somewhat ahead of its time. Sure, various aspects such as the music, sound, and aspects of the writing seem like they came out of the 80s, but despite being a largely episodic show, there is an underlying story that develops, with lore that's fairly consistent from one episode to the next, recurring characters, continuity nods, developments that have actual consequences, and a proper finale that wraps up the story. How many Western animated shows from the 80s or even 90s can you name that were like this? Of course, there were some examples, including occasionally in toy-driven shows, but they're very few and far between, and this sort of writing wouldn't become normal until years later, with an underlying continuity in story being one of the hallmarks of Western animated shows from the 2010s. So for as much as the show definitely feels like it's from the 80s, there are numerous aspects of it that make it feel much more contemporary, and that helps it to age pretty well and to still be a decent watch to this day. As time passes, its legend is growing, so Disney can take pride in knowing that Adventures of the Gummi Bears was important not only for the company, but for the entire animation industry.